Hi folks, welcome to Chapter 6 from your Microsoft Access textbook. You can get these notes from the course website at mgs351.com under the Microsoft Access section of the lecture notes. There's a corresponding data file with today's lecture, so I'll download that now to save for later. So Chapter 6 has to do with relational databases and how we implement those in Microsoft Access. So it's really starting to tie together a lot of what we've talked about throughout the semester. There's really two halves to today's lecture. The first half is going to discuss how do we set these database relationships, how do we set the features that go along with it, like referential integrity, cascade update, and delete. And those are things that you do once, typically in a database. You set them up at the very beginning once you've designed the database and built it, and those pretty much stay the same. The second part of what we're going to look at today are subforms. Subforms are extremely useful. They are required for your project. I believe probably every database I've ever built includes a subform. And so they're highly useful. I highly recommend them. They really help us tie together the data from multiple tables into a single unified view for the end user. We'll wrap up then with a few little helpful access utilities as well. So let's dive right into the database relationships. So for your projects, you've all hopefully by now have an approved entity relationship diagram, which you can move forward with the design and implementation of your project. And in order to do that, you have to set those corresponding relationships in Microsoft Access. And so the ERD that you have approved should mirror exactly the relationships you're going to set in Microsoft Access. The mechanics of that can get, it's not hard, but it can get a little tricky. If you don't do it right, it doesn't work. And so I want to caution you on some of the common errors that you'll encounter. So as the notes say, the tables that we're relating should be related from primary key to foreign key, and those fields should have similar data and compatible data types. We'll talk about what compatible data types are in a little bit. Also, very important that you set these relationships before you enter any data in the tables. You'll find that if you start entering in data, which is kind of the natural reaction, you have tables and you want to put data in them, but you can end up with a situation where the data that exists in your tables violate one of the functions or features of the relationships called referential integrity. Now, I don't expect you to understand what I mean at this point, so really, just for now, trust me when I say make sure you set the relationships before you enter any data into the tables. You can save yourself some headaches. And to get to the Database Relationships window, you just go to the Database Tools ribbon and you click the Relationships button. We'll see an example in a little bit. Right now is a screenshot of what this relationships window looks like, and you'll see this is a database made up of 3 tables: customers, loans, and payments. And you can identify the primary keys in each table pretty easily. So the customer ID in customers, loan ID in loans, and payment ID field in the payments table are the primary keys as indicated by the key next to it. And as we said on the previous slide, these tables should be related from primary key to foreign key. So in this example, customer ID in customers is the primary key, and it links to customer ID in the loans table as a foreign key. Same thing here. The loan ID primary key links to the loan ID foreign key in the payments table. One thing you might notice is that the customers and loans relationships has this indication of a 1 and infinity sign. This is referred to as many. It's just the notation that Microsoft Access uses. So we have a one-to-many relationship between customers and loans. You'll notice there's no indication of the relationship between loans and payments. I did this on purpose just for this example. When you do not enable referential integrity, it will not show this up. It will not show up the relationship. And so you are required to enforce referential integrity. I'll show you in just a minute what that means. But for now, realize when you can see the relationship as a one-to-many, then you've properly enforced referential integrity. When you cannot see it, that means you have not enforced referential integrity. And we want you to enforce referential integrity for your projects. It should look like this on the left. So we want to link primary key and foreign key fields, and we want to make sure they have compatible data types. And this is pretty straightforward. For example, if you have a primary key that's a short text data type, the corresponding foreign key should also be short text on the many side. If you have a number primary key, same thing, number should be the foreign key. If you have a date primary key, the date should be the foreign key. This last one, though, this is a tricky one, and it's something that probably almost all of you will encounter because a lot of you, I'm sure, are using auto number data types for your primary keys. So make a mental note of this. This is really important. When you have an auto number primary key, the foreign key should be number. Now let me repeat that. When you have an auto number primary key, the foreign key over here should be number. The reason for that is if you had auto number related to auto number, it would technically end up as a one-to-one relationship because the auto number field can never repeat itself. So just trust me when I say you always want to link auto number to a number foreign key. If you don't do that, the relationships aren't going to show up properly in your database. So I've had groups of students run into problems with these relationships over the years, and these are some of the common errors that have caused them to run into this trouble. And it can be very frustrating because if you have one thing just wrong, it's not going to work. So typically one of three things that causes these errors. First of all, you don't have your primary keys set in the table design, or you don't have an existing foreign key. It just doesn't exist there. Obviously, the primary keys you need to actually set in the table design as a primary key, so make sure that's done properly. Number two, if you've already entered data in the table, which, as I said just a minute ago, make sure you don't do that, you can run into a problem where the data violates what we call referential integrity. And so it doesn't allow you to actually display the relationships on the relationship window. The third error is because you've used incompatible or incorrect data types. And most of the time students realize, okay, you have to do text to text, but it's that auto number to number error that is very, very common. So just make sure that you have an auto number primary key and the compatible foreign key data type should be number. Of course, it goes without saying that if you have number linked to text, that's not going to work. So make sure that you have compatible fields, data types, and correct data types. So I've thrown around this term referential integrity a few times, and I've said just make sure you enforce this. It's a good thing to do, and I haven't really described it. And to be honest, it's actually very hard to describe in words. It's going to be easier to show you an example in just a minute. So let me just quickly show you this definition. We'll come back to it in a second. But it is, again, a requirement for your project. We want you to enforce referential integrity. In other words, the checkbox for this should be checked. And it helps ensure the integrity of the records in the database. When you enforce this option, you will see the one and infinity sign, the one-to-many sign. And when you have that enforced, there are options of what are called cascade update and cascade delete. Again, those three things are much better explained with an example. So let me do that. I'm going to open up the database that goes along with this lecture. It's the National Bank database. And if we go up to the database tools and the relationships, we'll see that there are already relationships set in this database. So let's take a look at this. Expand this a little bit so we can see a little better here. So again, we have our customer ID primary key linking to our customer ID foreign key. And then the loans table, we have the loan ID primary key linking to the loan ID foreign key. Now what's interesting is, in the payments table, loan ID is also part of the primary key, right? Because we have a concatenated primary key, meaning it's made up of more than one field. So the payments table uses loan ID and payment number together as a unique field as the primary key. So this is perfectly acceptable. It's the foreign key, and it's also part of the primary key. Sometimes you will see that. So let me start off by showing you a little bit of the mechanics of how to set these relationships, and then we'll get into the example of referential integrity, cascade update, and cascade delete. So you'll see in just a minute. So first of all, let me delete these relationships. We're going to start from scratch because your relationships won't be preset in your database. It will be actually a blank window. And there's a common misconception about how to delete these relationships. If you click on payments table and press the delete key, you say, oh, it's gone. And if you do the same thing for loans and customers, press the delete key, you'll say, great, it's gone. It's no longer there. You save the relationships. You go back into the relationships window after you've saved it, and you say, hey, it's empty, right? There's nothing there. Well, actually, all you've done, or all I've done, is hidden the relationships. It's really strange. I don't know why Access works this way, but it does. If you then right-click and say Show All, we'll just unhide those. So we actually never deleted the relationships. Let me show you how to actually delete the relationships. The key is you have to delete the line that's connected to any table. So I highlighted that line, and then I press the delete key for that, and it's going to delete the relationship line first. I'll do the same thing over here for customers and loans. The relationship line, I highlight it and press delete. And yes, we do want to delete that. And now I can delete all these tables because they're not linked to anything, and they truly will go away. Now, realize the table's not being deleted. It's just that the table in the relationship window is being deleted. So all the data is still there. The table actually exists. We're just not adding it as part of the relationship. So now we save it, and we have our database without any relationship set. So we go to Database Tools and Relationships again, and this is really what you'll see when you first open the Relationships window. In fact, what you'll see though is when you click the Show Table button, that's what you'll see. Because the very first time you set the relationships, it prompts you and says, hey, what do you want to add for your relationships? So we're going to go ahead and add customers, loans, and payments. I'm just going to double click on those, and you'll see the add in the window behind. And then we want to set the relationships between customers and loans and payments. Again, primary key to foreign key is how you want to link them. It doesn't matter which side you start on. I could start over on customer ID and loans and connect it over to customer ID and customers. So the direction you go doesn't matter. It's just that it must be primary key to foreign key or foreign key to primary key. And what you're going to do is you literally drag the field. So I'm going to drag the customer ID field on top of the other customer ID field. And when you do that, I just let go, you'll see that it shows, okay, the customers table with the customer ID field you're saying is linked to the loans table in the customer ID field. There are options to enforce referential integrity, which we want to enforce that. We click that box. That now enables cascade update and delete, which we'll leave those blank for now. And down here it says, hey, the relationship is one-to-many. If you see that, you've likely done this right. If you get a message that says indeterminate, you've got a problem. And so again, that might be one of those three errors with your primary keys not set properly or using incompatible data types. So if you see one-to-many, you typically have done it properly. The other thing to make sure of is sometimes I've seen occasions where students have dragged and dropped, customer ID, but they've dropped it on top of like the type field or some other field. Just make sure that these two fields match, because in your hurry, you might just link it to the wrong field, which is going to create some weirdness with the relationship. So we click on Create, and there we go. We have the relationship line. I'm going to do the same thing from loan ID to loan ID. Again, I'll just do it in reverse from the foreign key to the primary key to show you it doesn't matter which direction you go. I'm going to enforce referential integrity. We've got the one-to-many down here. That's good. Click Create, and there we go. We now have our relationship set enforced with referential integrity. Now, if this were your project for the class, and I approved an entity relationship diagram, if you did this right, the relationship lines that you're looking at on the screen should match exactly with the relationship lines you have on your approved entity relationship diagram. And it should be the same direction as well, one-to-many from customers to loans and one-to-many from loans to payments. If it's reversed, well, there's a problem, and seek out some help or try to figure out what's going on with that. But in order to do this properly, you should have it exactly the way that you have the approved design that's been given to you. So it should mirror that 100%. I'm going to close this now. We're going to come back to this in a second, but I want to show you what referential integrity will give you. One of the things it does is now that Access understands how the data is linked together, you can navigate the data through the tables a little more intuitively. So you'll see there's a little plus sign on the left-hand side over here now. When I click on the plus sign, it will show me all the related loan records for that particular customer. And you'll see the same thing here. For each loan, there's a plus sign, and I expand that, and it shows me all the related payments. So right now, I'm actually looking at 3 tables worth of data on one interface. And this is how intuitively we want to work with the data. So the relationships will help us do this. Now, I said that we're going to be working with subforms a little bit later. What you're looking at here is very similar to what subforms are going to be able to do for you. It's just doing this within a form as opposed to viewing it right through the table. So that's part of the power of the relationships and why it's important to set that. There are other reasons too. So let me go back and show you how to set cascade update and delete. Now we could have done that right at the very beginning, but I just wanted to show you how you edit the relationships too. So I go back to Database Tools and Relationships. And if you ever want to edit the relationship, all you do is double click the line, and you just have to get the mouse just right on that line, and it will open up the relationship window, and you can then select the other options you would like to select. So again, I'll go through the example to fully explain what these 3 things do in just a minute. I'm just really just showing you the mechanics of how to set these options right now. So So let's select Cascade Update and Delete for loans to payments. And now we're set with the relationships. Okay, so I'm going to close that. And I'm going to open up these three tables so we can take a look at all three at the same time. This is going to give us a pretty good view or understanding of what these options of referential integrity, Cascade Update, and Cascade Delete do. Okay, so here are the three tables. And we have in the customers table, let's take, for example, customer number 3. Actually, we're going to talk about referential integrity first. Let's say that I want to scam the bank for a loan. So I'm going to type in a loan, say loan 999, and we'll put it for January 1st, 2018, for $1 million, and 1%, 30 years, mortgage, and I'm going to make up a customer and say customer 99. As soon as I move off this record, it's going to yell at me. It says, hey, you can't add this record because you need a related record in the customers table. What you're seeing right now is the result of enforcing referential integrity. That's what referential integrity is all about. It's not going to let me add a foreign key customer ID, like customer 99, if that customer 99 doesn't exist in the customers table. And I guarantee you it doesn't exist. So large part of what referential integrity does is it makes sure that the data between tables stays tightly bound. If you did not have it enforced, it would let me enter in this record with no problem. I would be able to enter in customer 99, and then when we go to the customers table, we'd have no idea who customer 99 is. So that's a pretty dramatic example of referential integrity, but trust me when I say having the data tightly bound together is really important. When you have a situation where there are foreign key records like customer 99 in your database that don't correspond to the primary key, customer 99, it doesn't exist, we call these orphaned records because they just sort of exist out there. They don't have any link back to a primary customer record. So we really don't know who that person is. All right, we're going to click OK. We obviously can't do that. If I assign it to another customer, so customer 7, it should let me do that, right? Because referential integrity says that's fine. We have a customer 7, so you can enter in that record. Now, Cascade Update and Delete are options that you can set when you have referential integrity enforced. And I selected both of those options for both the relationships so we can see what these do. And again, this is easiest to show you with an example. So let me see customer number 3 right here. So there's Benjamin Grauer, and you'll see that customer 3 has a couple of loans too. There's a loan there, there's a loan, and there's a loan. Now, Cascade Update works like this. If I update the primary key value, so I change customer 3 to customer 4 down over here, as soon as I move off of this record, you'll see that the customer 3 records on the foreign key side will update as well. So let me move off. And there you go, customer 4, customer 4, customer 4, and so on. That's Cascade Update. That's typically a good option to select because you don't want those orphaned records out there, and it really makes the data stay tightly bound together. So it's a convenient way to be able to update those foreign key values if you ever change the primary key value. Cascade Delete is a pretty powerful way to delete records because if I delete, for example, stick with customer 4 again. If I delete customer 4's record from this table and I press the delete key, it gives me a little warning saying, hey, you're not just going to delete this one record, but you're going to delete related records. So I'm going to delete all of customer 4's loans. And then I have Cascade Delete set for loans to payments as well. So all those related payment records for those loans that are getting deleted are deleted as well. So let's go ahead and do it. You can see visually what happens. The word deleted shows up in each record. This only happens because the table is open and the record was deleted kind of externally. As soon as I close and reopen the table, that won't happen. And then down here, all these payment records have been deleted as well. So Cascade Delete is extremely powerful. For your projects, you can select or enforce Cascade Update and Delete based on your best decision. We're not going to judge whether that's right or wrong. Sometimes in certain situations it makes sense to, sometimes in other situations it doesn't make sense to. So you as a group decide what you want to do with Cascade Update and Delete. We're not going to question it for your project. So don't worry about that. Just go ahead and pick one and understand obviously what it does though. Okay, so that is a quick look at referential integrity, cascade update, and cascade delete, and really what those things will do for your database. Again, you want to make sure that you have referential integrity set. The relationships in your database are going to help you do things like build subforms, build multi-table queries, and a lot of other things. And so while it's just a one-time thing you have to do, the benefits of it just are with you the entire time you're using the database. Okay, so the next topic we're going to look at are subforms. I said these are really, really great. Probably every database I've ever built has a subform in it because they're really that useful. You know, one of the things that a lot of students struggle with when they first learn about databases is why we separate the data into these kind of separate tables and piles. And the reason is it's not really intuitive to us. It's not how we would want to look at the data. That's why I think a lot of students kind of struggle with that thinking. The nice thing about subforms is that we're actually pulling it all back together now in a unified way so that it really is the view that we want to look at the data. So we see an example right here where I have a customer's form, and inside of it I have a loan subform, and inside the loan subform I have a payments subform. We call this a nested subform because it's a subform inside of a subform. And this is showing you right now all of customer one's loans, and then all the payments for loan 49 for that particular customer. So 3 tables worth of data are being displayed concisely on a form and in a manner that we typically would want to look at the data. And so I'm going to show you the mechanics of how to build subforms. They're really easy to build. I'm also going to show you kind of where you can use subforms in your database. So really a subform is just a form inside of another form, but it's linked together. And it allows you to display data from related tables. So that's a prerequisite. The 2 tables do have to be related. You can have nested subforms, right? Subforms within subforms like we saw here. This payment subform is actually a nested subform inside of loans. And you can also have multiple subforms on a single form. I don't have a visual for this, but let's say, for example, we have loans here as one subform. Below this, we could have another subform as well. So maybe appointments, right, with the bank. And so you could have entirely separate subforms on a single form. That's perfectly valid to do. A lot of this really depends on how your database is designed. And let me show you what I mean by that. So if I go into the database relationships, I'll teach you the rule of thumb for using or building subforms. When you look at the relationship lines, it tells you where you can have a form and where you can have a corresponding subform. And it's very easy. When you have 2 tables with a one-to-many relationship, like customers and loans, the table on the one side of the relationship will be your main form. The table on the many side will be your subform. It's just as simple as that. So you can have customers as the main form and loans as the subform. Another way to look at this, if you're looking at loans and payments, you can have loans as a main form, it's on the one side, and payments as a subform because it's on the many side. So just remember, the main form is on the one side, the subform is on the many side. Now, in this case, we have the nested subform because we have customers as a main form, loans as a subform, but then we have another subform off of loans, which is payments. So when you're thinking about for your project where to include subforms, look at your database relationships. Anytime groups come to my office and ask questions about this, the first thing we do is we open up the relationships window and we look at the one-to-many relationships. And so don't make the mistake of trying to flip these around and do like a payments main form and a loan subform. That just doesn't work. So you really have to follow this rule of thumb of on the one side is the main form, the many side is the subform. So let's go ahead and I'll show you the mechanics of building this. It's very easy to do. Right now I already have a pretty ugly looking form, subform, and nested subform with the customers, loans, and payments. We're going to rebuild this and I'll show you a few ways to do that. So to create this subform, we're going to first start by using the form wizard. So go to create in form wizard and we can select all the fields from the customers table. Now if I also select the fields from the loans table, which is the related table to this, the wizard's going to recognize and say, this could be a form and a subform. That's what's showing here on the right hand side visually, that it can actually display the data as a form and a subform. if I choose to display the data by loans, it's just going to show one record for every loan. And that might be valid depending what you're trying to do. In our case, we're going to show the data by customers. We're going to use the subform feature. There's a related option called a linked form, which you can alternatively use. A linked form will have a button on the main form that opens a separate window to show you the subform. And typically you use this when you don't have enough space either on the main form or the subform to display the data that you want to display. And so it's perfectly valid to use. We're going to focus for now on the subform option. So I click next, next, and we're going to give this a name, loan subform 1. You'll see it actually has two separate forms, customers 1 and loan subform 1. Click finish, and there we go. We have our main form with a subform of loans. And you'll see as I scroll through this form, it shows me all the separate customers and their corresponding loans. This is really powerful, right? It brings this data back together for us. And so obviously we can change some things in the formatting. One of the things that's useful to do is, in some cases, is to remove the foreign key from the subform. So, this customer ID value here is kind of redundant because we know we're on customer 7. And it's not that we remove it, we can just hide it. So I'm going to click the width of this column and drag it to nothing. And it's still technically there, it's just hidden, right? So I guess the downside of that approach is the user can't assign this loan to some other customer in case there was a mistake. But other ways you could get around that if need be. So this is, really the power of subforms. Next, let's go ahead and add a nested subform into loans where we can then view the payments for each corresponding loan. So we go back to the design view. And we're going to close this, actually, go into the loan subform 1 directly. And I'm going to expand this, go up to our design, and this button over here is what allows us to add a subform. You'll also see there it says subform/subreport, so they have a similar type of idea that you can build on a report as well. So let me click this, drop it in here, and it will open up a wizard. And it's going to say, what would you like to use for your subform or subreport? You can use an existing table or an existing form. Well, we don't have a form that we really want there. We need to use the tables. So we're going to select it from the payments table, all the fields from there. Click next. And if your relationships are set properly, the default option here should be correct. So you don't really have to think about this step. As long as you set the relationships right, this will work just fine. What this step is saying is, how do the fields in the main form connect to the fields in the subform? And you'll see it's based on the primary foreign key setting. So click next, and we'll say that it's payment subform 1. Now when we close this, I'm going to go ahead and open up the customers 1 form so we can see all of this together. There's our main form with customers, our subform with loans, and now this little plus sign here indicates that there's a nested subform for each payment, or excuse me, for each loan, showing all the corresponding payments. So really, really useful, easy to build, really nothing too complex about that. Now, one other thing you can do is you can change the format of how this is displayed. Right now it's displayed in what's called the datasheet view, and it looks like a table. This is probably my personal preference. That doesn't mean anything about your grade. I'm just saying typically what I found in the databases I built is this gives me the best use of space on the screen. And so you can put the most data in front of the user, and this is typically what they want to see. But not in all cases. There are cases where you might want something a little different. So what you can do in the design view is change the setting. So if I click on the upper left-hand corner of the subform, there's an option here under Format, which is the default view setting. Right now you see it's set to Datasheet. You can change it to Single Form though. And when you do that, and I go back to the form view, you'll see that it shows up actually as a form, and then the corresponding records below show up as a datasheet still, because the payment subform is still set to datasheet. And I can scroll through each of these then. So there's each of those loans for customer number 1. Again, just a slightly different way to be able to access and organize the data on the systems. So that's an example of subforms, and hopefully you can see the benefit of it. Your homework assignment will walk you through building a lot of these subforms and the mechanics of it. I just showed you a quick example, but trust me when I say these are really, really useful and powerful to build in your database. It ties together all the data for the users in your system. So going back to our notes, just wanted to switch over to a few reminders actually. First of all, some Access utilities you might encounter. You might recall from the very first homework assignment that you were introduced to this option to compact and repair a database. And you may not realize what that was for, but the strange thing about Access database files is that they never shrink in size. You could literally delete everything in the database and it would still grow. And so it's just the way that the file itself format works. And so to reclaim that unused space, there's an option to do compact and repair. And I'll do that right now in this database. We'll save this form. I'll go up to File, Compact and Repair Database, and you'll see it goes very quickly. It closes it and reopens it just like that. And it's reclaimed any of the unused space. And so this is a good practice, especially before you email this file or post it, online to your website. You want to keep it as small and minimal as possible. So just a reminder, that's a useful utility. Also, if you ever run into some kind of weirdness with your file, just some weird error messages, it can't hurt to try compacting or repairing. I've had cases where that's kind of solved just the weird things that are happening in somebody's database. So it's not a terrible option just if you're running into some kind of strange error messages. Another utility I want to point out that's really useful, we're not really going to use it in the class, but you can actually use Microsoft Access to connect to other data sets. Either that's an Excel file or a text file or other database files. And you can even connect to non-Access database files. So you could connect to an Oracle database, SQL Server database, using a special technology called ODBC. And really what this lets you do is to use Access as a front-end database where you can write the queries, you can build forms and reports, but across the network, it's connecting to a back-end database where all the actual data is stored. And so this option for external data is actually really powerful. Again, I just want to highlight this because it's something that if you're using Access in your internship or place of employment, you might find it to be actually a pretty useful capability of the tool. All right, so quick review. What would be the appropriate pairing for setting these relationships? The correct answer would be letter B. When you have an auto number primary key, it should be linked to a number data type foreign key. Remember, you never set auto number to another auto number. It's always auto number primary key to a number foreign key. Next, a one-to-many relationship exists between physicians and patients, which is true. So this is exercising a bit of your relational design knowledge. And what you have to recall is that if you have a physician's table on the one side and a patient's table on the many side, that the primary key from the one side is going to be added as a foreign key on the many side. That's the simplification rule for one-to-many. So in this case, a physician ID primary key on the one side would be added as a foreign key to the patient's table. So letter A is the correct answer. Physician ID will appear in the patient's table, and that will be as a foreign key. Which of the following will remove the relationship between tables? I showed you this towards the beginning of this lecture, and the correct answer is letter A. Click the join line connecting the two tables and press the delete key. That's the only way to actually remove the relationships between two tables. Every table in an Access database, correct answer is letter D, neither A nor B. It does not have to be related to every other table, and it does not have to have a foreign key. In this example we looked at today, the customers table only had a primary key. It did not have a foreign key. And there are cases, some of your project in fact, where you'll have a single table just on its own, not linked to anything else. Given just the requirements of what you're trying to do, that's how it needs to be built. So the correct answer again is letter D, neither A nor B. Which of the following is true? Correct answer is letter C, because a main form may contain multiple subforms, and a subform may contain another subform. We call that a nested subform. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you can work and build with those subforms. All right, this one's a bit of a trick question, so listen carefully. When creating relationships between tables and Access, you must relate the tables on fields with the same data types. Well, The correct answer is false, because while it's true most of the time, you want to use the same data types, it's false when we're talking about odd number to numeric. So it's only most of the time that you relate on the same data type. So the correct answer is false. So your homework assignment for Chapter 6 will walk you through a lot of the subforms, the mechanics of doing it. Again, this is the best way to learn, so take the time to digest this material, practice it, work through it, and lastly, think about how this material can apply to your project. You are required to include subforms in your project, and this will provide you the tools and kind of the background to figure out what direction you can head with that.